All right, Emily, interested to know what's on your mind today.
Well, Crystal, earmarks are back. Well, they're not back yet, actually. Senate Republicans are set to vote on a secret ballot about whether to bring back earmarks. This is also kind of a bipartisan effort. There are Democrats who are interested in resurrecting their precious earmarks as well. They've been gone for about 10 years. You probably remember from the aughts, this was a really big deal. Politicians abusing earmarks. It was kind of a regular news cycle about how politicians were abusing earmarks. The argument is that they sort of provide a lubricant for legislating and for compromise. You know, you can bring people over with earmarks. And also, politicians are telling us they can do it with transparency this time. They can be responsible earmarkers. And so I think it's a really funny, but also a really important sort of thing that's happening. It's an important kind of asterisk to the daily news cycle, because if earmarks do come back, there will be a different style of legislation. It will happen immediately. This will have a big effect on Senate offices and House offices, what staff devotes their resources and their time to. Crystal, what do you think about this?
So it's really interesting. I'll get to the merits in a moment because I think we disagree on the merits. But what's interesting to me about this is I came up in an era where, like, every other Fox News segment was finding some wasteful, outrageous government spending. And I even had a term for it at the time. I don't know if you remember this story because you're a little younger than me, but there was like some conference where they paid $15 per muffin, et cetera. And so they would turn this into a whole thing. So my term for the whole genre of reporting and outrage manufacturing over it was like the $15 muffin syndrome. But that was a real driving energy during the Tea Party era,
yes.
Right? Any bill that you had, you would find the one thing that seemed really outrageous and you would make it like that was the whole bill. And it's just loaded up like a Christmas tree was some of the language that was used. And the fact that these are going away relatively quietly, I think is an indication of how we're in a very different era now. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that era, I mean, Trump is like a symptom of that era, but I also think he sort of paved the way where he, even though he governed in a lot of ways like a traditional Republican, his rhetoric was very different. And that broke the stranglehold on the sort of libertarian deficit hawk mindset within the Republican Party base. Again, the politicians, I think, still vote in the same way that they've been voting for decades, in a very Reagan consistent sort of a way. But the fact that these things are probably going to go away relatively quietly, to me, is a signal of a very different political era. On the merits, listen, maybe this is not a popular opinion, but if you're using earmarks to buy off people like Joe Manchin so that they'll actually support decent policy, I'm totally fine with it. If you're using it to buy off, let's say, Mark Kelly in Arizona to support the PRO Act, go for it. Be my guest. And so I guess I have sort of a situational view on earmarks. If they're used in order to help lubricate the wheels to pass things that are actually good, I'm for them. If they're not, then, you know, that's not great. And a lot of times what we label as earmarks are like projects that are actually really important to a certain district, a road or a bridge or a building or a something that the community is actually going to get some use out of. So I am not at all appalled by the return of earmarks. If it helps to get good things passed, then I am all for it.
Well, so the political story that we saw on the screen earlier was showing there was a letter signed yesterday by 15 Republican senators. It's an interesting group. You have people like Pat Toomey, Ben Sasse, Mitt Romney, with sort of the Tea Party stalwarts, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, saying that they will oppose the resurrection of earmarks. And to your point, there is this argument that these offices know their districts better than the federal bureaucracy who allocate grants otherwise. That's an interesting argument to me because they also know where to sort of put their money, right? And we've seen that there are studies that per every dollar spent on lobbying, you can look to how much people got back in earmarks. Is it a huge chunk of the budget? No, but I do think it does add this, like, it incentivizes the wheeling and dealing that Washington is way too used to doing. I actually think the best argument for bringing earmarks back is that they never really went away.
True.
Like, earmarks are just a really specific type of pork. But, you know, from my perspective, giving politicians more ammunition to do this wheeling and dealing, and even if there are good net benefits, I think it's a debate as to whether there are net benefits or just benefits, then, you know, you're just giving them more opportunity to engage with lobbyists and help lobbyists.
What about on the other point, though? Do you think that the Republican base is as riled up about this as they used to be? I mean, when I ran for Congress, it was 2010. Great year to run as a progressive Democrat in a rural district. Amazing timing on my part. But I went to a bunch of these Tea Party meetings.
Yeah.
And they were, I mean, they're politics were a little confused. The whole famous, like, keep your government hands off of my Social Security, whatever. Like, that was definitely there. But there also was genuine outrage about, like, spending. And now you have a relief bill that passed that, look, I think some of these things were actually inadequate, but a relief bill that was much larger than what Obama did under the stimulus. You have an infrastructure package that is sizable. You have priorities being talked about like universal pre-K and free community college that would be, you know, a significant expansion of what the government is doing. And the right doesn't seem like really lit up about these things. What they seem lit up about are more like, you know, the stereotypical one is like the Dr. Seuss controversy, like those sorts of things, which are more focused on culture versus this libertarian ideology and like Reagan type economics. Those seem to be the things that are really driving energy. I mean, and also just sort of like loyalty tests to Donald Trump are the other thing that drive energy in the Republican base right now.
No, I mean, if we sort of teleported ourselves back to 2010 and imagined any Republicans supporting this, which we know there are some Republicans supporting this, it's kind of unimaginable, actually, because the atmosphere was that like libertarian, limited government, don't tread on me attitude. Don't tread on me is now more of a cultural attitude on the base of the Republican Party than anything else, and that's a super, super important point. It's people care about spending in the aggregate. So like they care about the general conversation that the government shouldn't go bankrupt and shouldn't spend too much money. But in specific priorities, if it's something that they support, no. You know, so it's kind of like there isn't a huge energy right now to rein in government spending on the right. But if it's branded, I think in terms of government overreach and of Washington corruption and the swamp, which earmarks, by the way, are very easily branded as the swamp, swamping it up. In that case, then I think they could muster some energy. But I think your point is dead on. The fact that any Republicans, although they seem to be doing it privately, are in support of this, that's a huge sign of the times and how they have shifted from 2010 to right now.
Yeah, the center of gravity in politics is just in a different place. And the things that are energizing the right and also some of the things that are energizing the left, I think, are just really different. This is a really interesting example of that.
Trump himself floated bringing back earmarks, from what we know.
That's right. Yep, very good point. All right, next on Rising, Jennifer Holdsworth Karp and Rachel Bovard. They're going to be here for Team Rising. That is next.